recording, but I was trying to keep it in bite-sized chunks for you. Okay, so very quickly, come to the top here. I'm going to make a new layer with my... Oh, I didn't mean to do that. I need to use the line tool. Okay, so I'm making a line, adding an ellipse. Okay, Command and T to transform it, change the anchor point to the middle here, and then I'm going to do a rotate. Let's do 15 degrees, and then a slight transform. And then when I do Shift, Alt, Command and T, it's going to change the scale as well as the rotation. Okay, which creates a cool pattern. That's the short version. And then we can group this together as well. And the reason we do that is so that we can paint into a clipping mask that's on top of that layer. So grabbing the brush and then putting some color into that. Okay, so that's basically the setup of what I ran through here. The next thing I want to run through is we've got other shapes that we can use here as well. One useful one is the polygon tool. So I actually have a bigger tutorial on this on Skillshare, so I'm not going to run through all this, but if anyone wants to look at this particular technique, send me a message. I'll share a link on the site, but this basically explains how to make these kind of polygon patterns in Photoshop. There's a few different ones on there. Yeah, so essentially once you know how to use the triangle tool and manipulate things, then you can create these kind of polygonal patterns within Photoshop. Okay, but I'll share this with you and you can watch through it if you want to, if you think it's relevant. But hiding that and that, if we grab the polygon tool, then the first option we've got, if we look up at the options toolbar, is the number of sides, which I think we looked at. So we can create a triangle in here. Okay, we can also create stars as well. So if we come in here, you can see we've got a star option, which allows us to inset the sides of this by a certain percentage. Okay, so I'm going to indent my size by 53%. I'll make this a 7-point star, and so now when I draw it, it's going to have indented those shapes. Okay. All right. And one of the main reasons for kind of reintroducing the vector shapes here is just to show you how we can use these with drawing and brushes. So I'm going to jump to a brand new, in fact I'm going to open something up here. Oh yeah. Alright. So one of the things I like to do is make brushes from little doodles that I make. Okay. So I'm gonna grab this. Okay. And very quickly just go around this and make this into a brush. Actually, I was going to get rid of the grid, but I think it's going to look nice in there when it repeats. So if we grab a doodle like this, we can get some interesting effects when we actually have made that into a brush, because it's going to accept the color and the texture in some different ways. And when I first started making these, I was really into the idea that I should make this a perfect black, but actually you get a nicer effect sometimes when you leave the shades of the gray in there. So if we select an area and go to Edit, and Define Brush Preset. Where am I? I've lost my flow now. There we go. when you're working on the smaller screen, everything's in slightly a different place. So basically we get this kind of brush. So we'll call this cubes. Okay, and if I jump back to my star here now, I'm going to grab my brush tool, which is going to jump straight to my cubes, which I need to make a new layer above this, and I'll make it a clipping mask straight away. Okay, but now, as long as I change the color, I can basically brush into that shape. Okay, so you can get some interesting effects by brushing into those shapes, and we can obviously change the size of the brush, okay, for different effects. Okay, so you can get some neat layering. When you're using the brush tool, if you hold down the Alt key, it will allow you to select a color. Okay, so we can grab colors from the background image and draw or paint with them into that layer. Now when we're creating a brush, and I'll just jump to a new document for this one. Okay, basically we have some other options for it across in the brushes toolbar, which we bring up, or the brushes panel, by bringing this up. Okay, have I talked at all about brushes before? Yeah, a little bit. How much did I go into it? I showed us this, yeah, but I'll show it briefly again. So we talked about the scattering and the shape dynamics, so we can change the size. We can push the scattering up, so it's going to scatter as we paint, and then we can change the count jitter and the count in terms of the number of brushes that will kind of show up. Okay, so if I grab this brush now, when I paint with it, it's scattering a little bit, and it's painting, but it's not rotating because I need to change my angle jitter. Okay, so now when I paint with that, it's kind of going to paint a shape, and you get this cool blend of those edges off the side. So if I change the opacity here, then as I do that, we're going to kind of get that brush blending quite nicely. Okay. Now you can do it also by just using it as a stamp, and it's going to keep rotating as we do that too. So if I just keep pushing with that, every single one of those brushes is going to be in a slightly different angle or spot. Okay. We can also jitter the hue as well, which I'm not sure if we touched on that yesterday, but we can change the hue to jitter between the foreground and background color. So if we change this up a little bit, then it's gonna why are you not jittering? Tip. Oh, I think it's because I have to pull on it to make it jitter. But if I change, yeah, maybe it's not going to jitter. No, it is jittering a little bit. It's just not very visible. So it's changing the color from every time that I press it, from the foreground to the background color a little bit. Okay, so you can see it a bit more clearly when I turn the opacity back up. Okay. Okay, but the main point being is that we can start to paint into some of the things, shapes that we wanted to draw. So if we're making a city, then a building doesn't have to be like a photographic representation of a building, although it could be in part. It could be that you grab the rectangle tool, draw a tower, and all of this really comes down to what you want to do creatively for your design. Okay, so if we draw a tower here, add a new layer with a clipping mask, grab the brush tool, then just change the color of this. Okay, our tower could be, you know, just a abstract series of stamps and shapes within that, right? And I would say that scanned in drawing and then the brush tool in Photoshop still counts as drawing. Okay, so creatively that's the kind of options you've got. Okay, but don't copy me. Think of your own way of mixing these tools up and thinking of new ways of doing it. Okay. All right, so we're running out of time. I'm going to leave selective color and blurring for another week. Does anyone have any questions as we're finishing up? No? Okay. So there's a few, like Photoshop's like building blocks, right? You kind of build up what you've learned every time you use it. So these techniques that I've shown you tonight, a lot of them relate back to other things that we've covered, but I'm trying to suggest that you can experiment with them in different ways, okay? And if I see that experimentation in your work, then that's what's going to get the kind of big prizes, right? So inventing new ways or thinking of different ways in which you can blend these things together. Oh, one thing I will show you for sure, actually, which I definitely should show you before we finish up, is we've got a brush here. We're talking about vectors. So I'm going to actually go back to my tower image, turn this guy off. So on this one, if I make a new layer, so this is, I think I cover this in one of the extra videos that I left you guys with. I'm going to grab the pen tool here, and I'm going to make a path with the pen tool. Okay, so basically if I have a path, a vector path like this, okay, I can come to my work path that's here, just hit enter to apply that. So I can select it here, and then I've got some options here for either selecting an area, okay, or for stroking along that area. So basically this option here, so sharpen yellow, maybe not, is if I now grab my brush tool, so I just tap B to go back to the brush tool, we'll now stroke along that path, okay. So if you want to do stuff accurately and you haven't got a pen tablet to draw stuff with, then using the path tool to draw a path and then stroking along it is a good way to go. So for instance, if we make really simple paths, so I'm going to grab my pen tool, okay, and just draw a path like that, enter. Oh, yeah, okay, so I've got my work path here. If I grab my brush tool now, I can stroke that path. I can grab my direct selection tool from down here. I can move that path, maybe change my colors a little. Okay, and then grab the brush tool again, and then I can stroke the next path, so you can kind of create some different things going on there. Alright, and the more you play around, the more interesting things we'll get, right? So there's not I think some people were kind of wondering about the assignments because they're not directed, like there's not an exam there's not a kind of final assignment, and that's because that's not the way Photoshop and designing things like this works, right? We have to just experiment, and it's more like a studio class where we're trying to discover new ways in which we can do these things, okay? And I don't have all the answers, I just have starting points for you guys. So, okay, but that looks pretty cool. And we can also start to mask this in behind that tower as well, which is what I was getting to earlier. So with these different layers that we've drawn, we could actually start to use that tower silhouette as a mask to kind of pull the strokes in front of and behind it, okay? Alright, but I'll leave that for another time. So